We will discuss the JSP architecture. We'll understand JSP Lifecycle. We'll explain how to create a JSP and run it in a web application. We'll discuss JSP elements and tags. We'll describe JSTL and custom tag libraries. Let's start with an introduction to JSP. Here we'll look at what is JSP, advantages of JSP, JSP architecture, JSP versus servlets, web container responsibilities, and JSP API. JSP is a text document consisting of HTML, XML, and JSP elements which can be expressed in standard and XML syntax. JSP is used to develop web-based applications. It supports the separation of presentation and business logic as follows. Web designers can design and update pages without learning Java programming language. Java technology programmers can write code without having to be concerned with web page design. It provides optional mechanism to configure web application file web.xml. JSP programming eliminates the need for repeated deployment, which means that saving the JSP and making a request whenever the JSP is changed actually will refresh the JSP page. The automatic deployment is taken care of by the container called Jasper, which stands for JSP Execution Environment. JSP programming languages also provides custom tags development. The JSP programming environment provides automatic page compilation. Here is the JSP architecture. We have a browser that sends a request to the servlet. The servlet plays the role of a controller in a typical MVC or model view controller pattern. The controller may forward the request to a Java bean, which is a Java class which acts as a model and defines the structure of the data. The Java bean gets instantiated. The response from the Java bean or the data can be forwarded to the JSP, which plays the role of the view. So here you see segregation of responsibility, where the servlet plays the role of the controller, which defines the flow of the use case. The data is managed by the model, which is the Java bean, and the view or the presentation layer is managed by the JSP. And finally, in case you need to connect to a data store to retrieve data, that is also possible. JSP is used to dynamically generate web content on a server and return it to the client. This can also be done using a servlet. So why do we need JSP? JSP performs a number of tasks. To understand, let's learn about the differences between JSP and servlets. JSP is a web page scripting language that can generate dynamic content. Servlets are Java programs that are compiled. They create dynamic pages. It is easier to code in JSP than in Java servlet. It involves writing a lot of code in the servlets. JSP, in MVC model, we saw that the JSP acts as a view. Custom tags can be used, which can directly call Java beans. JSP is generally preferred when there is not much processing of data required. It runs slower compared to servlets as it takes compilation time to convert into Java servlet. On the servlet front, in MVC model, the servlets act as a controller. There is no such custom tag option available in servlets, and servlets are best for use when there is more processing and manipulation involved. Servlets also run faster than JSP. What does a web container do in JSP? It provides standard libraries required for coding. It provides a suitable environment for execution. It calls the callback methods at appropriate times, and it maintains the life cycle of the program. JSP technology is based on JSP API. It consists of the following packages. Servlet.jsp, which is the classes and interfaces for core JSP. Servlet or the Java Server Pages library, and finally the EL or the expression language package. Let's look at the JSP lifecycle and its implicit objects. The JSP lifecycle involves the following steps: translation of JSP to servlet code, compilation of servlet to bytecode, loading servlet class, creating servlet instance, initialization by calling JSP init, request processing by calling JSP servlet, and destruction with JSP destroy. In the first step, the web container translates the JSP file into a Java source file that contains a servlet class definition. So when we request the web container for a JSP file, the JSP file is converted into a .java file. That is the first step. The compilation of servlet is then done to bytecode. So if you look at the hello.jsp file, this is the server-side scriptlet where we are initializing a count to 0 and simply printing it again in the JSP scriptlet. Here we have the JSP class hello.jsp, which extends the servlet, and you can see how the JSP was translated into the equivalent code that we wrote in the previous demos to generate a servlet. In the second step, the web container compiles the servlet code to a Java class file. So the servlet source code will now be converted into a Java file, and further the compilation will happen to convert the .java to a .class file. In the third step, the servlet bytecode is loaded into the web container's JVM software using the class loader. So that you can see the web container will be loaded with the compiled bytecode. In the fourth step, the web container creates an instance of the servlet class. So here the web container will fire the constructor to generate an instance of the servlet class that was generated from the initial JSP. In the fifth step, the web container initializes the servlet by calling the JSP init method. So that is step number 5. The initialized servlet can now service requests, which each request the web container can call the JSP service methods for the converted JSP page. And here you see that step number 6. When the web container removes the JSP instance from the services, it first calls the JSP destroy method to allow the JSP to perform any requirement cleanup. What are implicit objects? These are the Java objects that the JSP container makes available to developers in each page. The developers can call them directly without explicitly declaring them. JSP technology has 9 implicit variables. They represent commonly used objects for servlets that JSP page developers might need to use. You can retrieve HTML from parameter data by using the request variable, which represents the servlet request object. Here you see the implicit variables, the request variable, the HTTP servlet request object associated with the request, the response object associated with the response, the JSP writer object associated with the output stream if you want to write content in the response, the HTTP session object with the session for the given user of the request, only meaningful if the JSP page is participating in a session, the application scope, which is application wide data sharing, the config, which is the servlet config application object for the web app, page context that encapsulates the environment of a single request for this JSP page, and exception, the throwable object that was thrown by some other JSP page only available in a JSP error page, and finally the page scope, which represents current JSP page.